I'm David Cott, host of New History of Spain, and this is episode 11, titled The Barbarian Wars That Changed Hispania Forever. In this episode you will learn about how the Vandals, Suebi, and Alans entered and settled in Hispania, the first visit of the Visigoths to these lands, and the initial steps in the rise of the Visigothic Kingdom of Toulouse. The Vandals, Suebi, and Alans arrived in Hispania. In episode 10, Alaric and the Barbarian migrations, I set the stage by discussing who the Goths, Vandals, Alans, and Suebi were during the period of Great Migrations. If you miss it, I recommend listening to it first. In Gaul, the would-be Emperor Constantine III, along with the Franks, pushed the Vandals, Suebi, and Alans into Aquitaine, in southern France, where they lived off the land. Constantine III used the opportunity to invade Hispania to the southwestern part of Gaul, which was left unoccupied by the barbarian Rhine coalition. Constantine aimed to conquer Hispania as a necessary step to becoming emperor of the Western Roman Empire. Dominating Hispania was also a strategic decision. The family of Theodosius, the previous emperor and father of the two current emperors, came from Hispania, and Honorius' cousins were influential figures there. By neutralizing them, Constantine could avoid a two-front war in Hispania and Italy. Constantine's army, officially led by his son but actually commanded by General Gerontius, advanced in 408 without facing any significant resistance, according to the chronicler Horosius. It's not surprising that there was little resistance. By the 5th century, no professional Roman legions remained in Hispania. Only local militias were left, and they lacked the training and equipment of professional soldiers. However, Honorius' cousins didn't give up. They managed to gather militias from Lusitania loyal to their cause, but were defeated. They then raised a private army funded out of their own pockets, which took time to assemble because their estates were spread across Hispania. This also shows how wealthy some Roman landowners were. Honorius' cousins sent part of their private army to the Basque Pyrenees to block reinforcements from Gaul for Constantine's troops in Hispania, but they failed. Eventually, Constantine's army and the forces of Theodosius' family met in battle somewhere in the northern part of central Iberia. Unsurprisingly, Constantine's professional army, made up mostly of barbarians, was far superior to any private militia of armed peasants and slaves. Honorius' two cousins were captured and taken to Arles, where Constantine III, instead of using them as bargaining chips to negotiate with Honorius, had them executed. After this victory, Constantine demanded that Honorius recognize him as co-emperor, which he did in 409. As a reward for his victory, Constantine's son allowed his troops to plunder the fields of Palencia, an area in the northern Meseta region with rich Roman villas. He also gave control of the Pyrenean roads to his barbarian troops instead of the native rural militias, who had traditionally guarded these passes against robbers and bandits. The purpose of this move was to prevent any new resistance in favor of Honorius and to stop an attack from Hispania on Arles, Constantine's capital. The ancient historian Sozomen claimed that this decision led to the country's downfall. With this situation causing unrest among the Hispano-Romans, Constantine's son left to visit his father, leaving Gerontius in charge of Hispania. Remember that Alaric's Visigoths were besieging Rome at this time? Constantine saw this as an opportunity to overthrow Honorius and take control of the entire western part of the Roman Empire. Unfortunately for him, he had to abandon the plan because everything quickly turned against him. General Gerontius took advantage of the Hispano-Romans' discontent with Constantine's policies and acted in ways that made Arles suspicious of his loyalty. As a result, Constantine sent a new general to replace Gerontius, but Gerontius openly rebelled. It seems that a significant part of Constantine's army was in Hispania, so he quickly lost key supporters, and Hispania, Britannia, and much of Gaul stopped being loyal to him. As you can see, loyalties in the 5th century were fickle. Gerontius elevated a puppet Hispano-Roman from his inner circle, a man named Maximus, to the rank of emperor, to gain the favor of the Hispanians. Realizing he needed more soldiers to face both Constantine III and Honorius, Gerontius made a pact with the Vandals, Alans, and Suebi, who had been struggling to survive in Aquitaine for 2 years. Between late September and early October of 409, the Vandals, Alans, and Suebi crossed the Pyrenees with the approval of the barbarians left in charge of the Pyrenean passes by Constantine's son, as they were loyal to Gerontius. Some historians like Guy Halsall and José Sotochica interpret this as an invasion, and believe that the Partition of Hispania in 411 was something the barbarians did without permission, and it was accepted after the fact by the puppet emperor Maximus. However, this view doesn't align with ancient sources or the sequence of events. In 409, it wasn't necessarily planned for these barbarians to settle in Hispania. It seemed more like a temporary movement of troops. In summary, the Vandals, Suebi, and Alans didn't enter the Iberian Peninsula as invaders, but as groups of families and mercenaries serving two illegitimate Roman leaders, Gerontius and Maximus. Only later, through the course of events, did the year 409 come to be seen as the beginning of the end for Roman Hispania. Hispano-Roman reaction to the arrival of the barbarians. Although it wasn't an invasion, the massive influx of immigrants caused disorder, leading to disturbances, looting, and violent clashes between the barbarians and the Hispano-Romans. The barbarians, who were warriors traveling with their families, resorted to violence and subversion of Roman order when they weren't provided with food to survive. Looting wasn't a sustainable way to live, nor was it an ideal survival strategy, so both the Hispano-Romans and the barbarians had to learn to coexist. The barbarians were interested in occupying cities to use the Roman tax system, which collected taxes from rural areas. The Hispano-Romans either welcomed the barbarians or saw them as no worse than the Roman officials. The Hispano-Roman cleric and historian Horosius admitted that, quote, "Among them, there may be found some Romans who, living with the barbarians, prefer freedom with poverty to tribute paying with anxiety among their own people," end quote. Many Hispano-Romans found the security provided by the barbarians, along with the lower taxes, preferable to living under Roman rule. As a result, they generally accepted the situation and worked with the barbarians. However, other accounts, like those of Bishop Hidatius, describe the arrival of the Vandals, Suebi, and Alans in Hispania as causing great destruction and violence. Hidatius, who experienced this as a child, painted a very apocalyptic picture of the barbarians' arrival, saying, quote, "The barbarians who had entered Hispania pillaged it with the vicious slaughter. The pestilence wreaked its own devastation just as vigorously. As the barbarians ran wild through Hispania and the deadly pestilence continued on its savage course, the wealth and goods stored in the cities were plundered by the tyrannical tax collector and consumed by the soldiers. And thus, with the 4 plagues of sword, famine, pestilence, and wild beasts raging everywhere throughout the world, the annunciations foretold by the Lord through his prophets came to fulfillment." End quote. It's important to remember that looting and killing were not new behaviors brought by the barbarians. These were also actions the Roman Republic and Empire engaged in during their conquests. This is important to highlight because people sometimes forget how Scipio Aemilianus completely destroyed Carthage or starved the people of Numantia. In some ways, the so-called barbarians were less barbaric than the Romans, as they didn't enslave entire communities like the Romans did. And Hidatius claimed that the barbarians practiced cannibalism is a fabrication. That said, historian José Sotochica rightly points out that we shouldn't lose empathy for those who suffered from the violence and theft by the barbarians. It's undeniable that living alongside the newcomers was difficult in the early years. Hidatius predicted that the war would end in 482. and although we know he was wrong, he was right that the end of a wall, the Roman wall, was approaching. The defeat of the Usurpers. While Gerontius repelled the forces sent to Hispania by Constantine III, a military rebellion broke out in Roman Britain after Constantine left the islands defenseless against Saxon attacks. As a result, Britannia quickly ceased to be Roman. Constantine had only a few supporters left in Gaul, around his capital in Arles. Seeing this and the death of Alaric, Emperor Honorius believed his luck had finally turned, and the time had come to defeat the usurper Constantine III. Honorius appointed Constantius as general, and both Gerontius and Constantius marched against Constantine. The two-front war that Constantine had feared became a reality, though not in the way he expected, due to betrayal within his own ranks. Gerontius defeated Constantine in open battle and laid siege to Arles. But while the siege was ongoing, Constantius arrived. In a twist of fate, most of Gerontius' soldiers deserted and joined Honorius' side. Perhaps they were tired of fighting and saw a better chance for security and stability by switching to the side that seemed more likely to win. Gerontius fled with a few supporters, but even they turned against him. In despair, Gerontius killed his wife and then took his own life to avoid being captured and killed by others. Meanwhile, General Constantius defeated the usurper Constantine III and had him executed on the way to court. But even then, Honorius couldn't feel secure and fully savor his victory. A Gallo-Roman senator named Jovinus rebelled in Gaul, supported by the Burgundians, Alans, and some Gallo-Roman aristocrats. This all happened while the Visigoths, now led by Ataulf, were still in Italy. The 411 Partition of Hispania. Without Gerontius, Maximus of Hispania was powerless, but during his brief reign and shortly before Gerontius' death, the usurper Maximus made a crucial decision. In 411, he agreed with the Vandals, Suebi, and Alans to divide Hispania, giving them areas to settle as federates, meaning allies. In exchange for certain benefits, such as keeping a significant portion of the taxes collected in their territories, they were expected to fulfill military duties. Of the 7 provinces of the Diocese of Hispania, Maximus and the Roman administration kept direct control over Tarraconensis, the Balearic Islands, and Mauretania Tingitana, the northern coastal region of Morocco. The Alans settled in the large provinces of Lusitania and Carthaginensis. The Silingi Vandals, who were more numerous than the Hasdingi Vandals, took over the fertile region of Baetica in western Andalusia. The Hasdingi Vandals established themselves in the north, with some historians suggesting they settled in northern Galicia and Asturias, while others believe they populated the region of Tierra de Campos in Castile and Leon. Finally, the Suebi settled in southern Galicia, between the Hasdingi Vandals and the Alans. Meanwhile, in much of Cantabria and Vasconia, modern Basque Country and Navarre, local militias and elites replaced the Roman administration. In Vasconia, the same rural militias that controlled the Astorga-Bordeaux Pass became the region's leaders. According to Hydatius, the provinces were divided by lot, but this seems unlikely given what was at stake. It's true that when you look at the map of the 411 Partition of Hispania, it appears somewhat random. For instance, it doesn't make much sense for the Alans, who weren't the largest group, to control 2 large provinces like Lusitania and Carthaginensis. However, maps can be misleading, because the Barbarians primarily controlled the cities and little else. Despite the fact that a significant community of Alans remained in Gaul, Hydatius suggested that the Alans had some form of dominance over the Vandals and Suebi, though the practical implications are unclear. In any case, the uneven distribution of territories, without considering the number of soldiers and families in each barbarian group, soon led to conflicts. It's important to remember that these barbarian groups had not yet formed stable political units or identities. They simply followed the leader with the most prestige and strength at any given moment. As historian Javier Arce points out, the idea that the barbarians divided Hispania among themselves is not plausible. Otherwise, it's hard to explain why they respected the Roman administrative boundaries, or why a chronicler noted that after Gerontius' death, Maximus sought refuge in the territory of those he had made agreements with. So, there are a few key points to keep in mind about the arrival and settlement of the Vandals, Suebi, and Alans in Hispania. First, the barbarians settled in Roman provinces through agreements with Hispano-Roman authorities, even though these were considered illegitimate by Honorius' government. Second, while some Hispano-Romans suffered from the violence of the barbarians, others saw the benefits of being under their protection, preferring it over the heavy taxes imposed by Rome. Third, the Romans who accepted the barbarian kings as representatives of the emperor gradually saw them as legitimate rulers of their own independent kingdoms. And fourth, with the Partition of Hispania, we cannot yet speak of the creation of barbarian kingdoms as fully formed entities. These were still armies that sometimes remained loyal to Rome and sometimes didn't, without stable political structures. The Hispano-Roman elites and administration had no choice but to accept, collaborate, and coexist with the barbarians in the face of the central government's abandonment. The failed alliance between Honorius and Ataulf. After Alaric's death, his brother-in-law Ataulf became the new king of the Visigoths. Ataulf abandoned the idea of moving the Goths to Africa and instead headed to Gaul, as General Constantius was pressuring him in Italy. But remember that in 411, a new usurper named Jovinus was proclaimed emperor by the Gallo-Roman aristocracy, the Alans of Gaul, and the Burgundians. Ataulf contacted Jovinus and began negotiations to support him, seemingly in good faith. However, during their journey, the Visigoths encountered a Gothic leader who had once been close to Stilicho and was now also supporting Jovinus. This leader had been a mortal enemy of Alaric, so Ataulf captured and executed him. Naturally, this angered Jovinus, who then appointed his brother as co-emperor without consulting Ataulf, leading to hostilities between the two. The leader of the Visigoths then decided to negotiate an alliance with Emperor Honorius. The agreement was that the Visigoths would crush the rebellion in Gaul and return Honorius' half-sister Galla Placidia to him. In return, Honorius promised them land to settle on and food supplies. Jovinus' troops were defeated, and both Jovinus and his brother were executed in 413. Immediately after, the Visigoths settled in Gallia Narbonensis in southern France, taking control of cities like Narbonne and Toulouse. However, problems soon arose again for Emperor Honorius. The governor of Africa declared himself emperor and interrupted the grain supply to Rome, which was essential for feeding Italy. Although the rebellion was crushed that same year, Honorius was unable to send the supplies he had promised the Visigoths, who were tired of dealing with emperors who failed to keep their promises, especially regarding something as vital as food. To make matters worse, Honorius granted allied status to the Burgundians in the Rhone Valley, while the Visigoths were still waiting for their own land to be officially assigned. As supplies ran low, the Visigoths clashed again with the Roman Imperial troops, and the fragile relationship between the Romans and Visigoths broke down once more. Ataulf and Galla Placidia, an impossible love. But even during this time of war between the Romans and the Visigoths, love could still blossom between a Goth and a Roman. The chronicles tell us that by 411, Galla Placidia and Ataulf had fallen in love, meaning the hostage had fallen for her captor. Their love was confirmed with their marriage in 414, a ceremony that followed Roman traditions to show how Romanized the Goths had become. This marriage was a significant step for Ataulf's ambitions, as it linked him to the Imperial family, and a child from this union could could potentially have become a Roman emperor. According to the chronicler Honorius, Ataulf declared at the wedding, quote, "At first, I wanted to erase the Roman name and convert all Roman territory into a Gothic empire. I longed for Romania to become Gothia, and Ataulf to be what Caesar Augustus had been. But long experience has taught me that the ungoverned wildness of the gods will never submit to laws, and that without law, a state is not a state. Therefore, I have more prudently chosen the different glory of reviving the Roman name with Gothic vigor, and I hope to be acknowledged by posterity as the initiator of a Roman restoration, since it is impossible for me to alter the character of this empire." End quote. I'm sure Honorius would have shed tears if he had heard these words, but he couldn't have because these words were more than likely never spoken. Instead, Honorius demanded, once again, that his half-sister be returned. In response, Ataulf declared the senator Priscus Attalus as Roman emperor, much like Alaric had done before, to put more pressure on Honorius. However, this time Honorius had a capable general, Constantius, leading the army. Constantius decided to launch a naval blockade of the Mediterranean ports of Gaul and cut off the Visigoths' land supply lines. The Visigoths were trapped, so Ataulf made a drastic decision as dissatisfaction grew. He moved the Visigothic Confederation to Hispania Tarraconensis. Honorius captured the usurper Priscus Attalus, cut off his hand, and exiled him to an island in Sicily, where he died. In Tarraconensis, with an improvised court set up in Barcelona, the first and only son born from the union of Ataulf and Galla Placidia died shortly after birth. With his death, the dream of creating a Roman Visigothic imperial lineage also ended. Like Alaric before him, Ataulf saw his ambition of becoming the most powerful man in the western part of the Roman Empire slipping away. Ataulf began negotiations to improve relations with Rome again, but an anti-Roman faction emerged among the Goths. This group believed that Ataulf was becoming too Roman, or at least used that as an excuse to seize power. The conspiracy, led by several Visigothic warriors and those close to the Gothic leader killed by Ataulf years earlier, succeeded. Ataulf was assassinated in Barcelona in the summer of 415. Sigeric, the brother of Alaric's mortal enemy, was declared king of the Visigoths. His first act was to brutally murder Ataulf's children from his previous marriage before he wed Galla Placidia. He also publicly humiliated Galla Placidia by forcing her to walk several kilometers through the streets of Barcelona alongside other captives. Ataulf's brother Wallia was enraged and saddened. While Ataulf had become somewhat unpopular due to the recent political and military setbacks, Sigeric's brutality and inhumanity disgusted most Visigoths. Only 7 days after Ataulf's murder, Sigeric was killed, and the anti-Roman faction was neutralized. Wallia was then chosen as the new king of the Visigoths, allowing the Balti dynasty to continue leading the Visigothic people. As we will see, Wallia's reign will be decisive for the future of the other barbarian groups in Hispania. Wallia's campaign in Hispania. The first thing Wallia attempted was to revive Alaric's dream of settling his people in North Africa. He ordered the construction of ships, but once again a storm ended that dream, this time for good. With his soldiers and their families starving, Wallia had only one option left: to offer his services to Emperor Honorius through a new treaty. The treaty, signed in 416, tasked the Visigoths with the mission of expelling the barbarians who had entered the Iberian Peninsula in 409. They were also to return Ataulf's widow, Galla Placidia, whose captivity no longer made sense after Ataulf's death. Honorius' trusted general, Constantius, married her, despite her reluctance, and in return, Honorius provided the Visigoths with large amounts of grain. From the grain they received, historian José Sotochica estimated that the Visigothic population during Wallia's reign was between 75,000 and 100,000 people, with 19,000 to 25,000 of them being warriors. These numbers reflect a reduction of 25 to 37% of the population that had followed Alaric during the sack of Rome. However, this decrease is not surprising given that during these tough times, the barbarians tended to follow only the most successful leaders. Under Ataulf, many of those who had once followed Alaric likely deserted, formed their own small bands, joined other groups, or served private landowners. Additionally, war, famine, and plague also took their toll on the population. But going back to the narrative, the Vandals, Suebi, and Alans in Hispania had also offered their services to Honorius, hoping he would recognize the legitimacy of the 411 Partition of Hispania. But he refused their offers. Perhaps he was waiting for them to weaken each other, or maybe he chose the Visigoths because they were more desperate and still held Galla Placidia. Either way, pitting barbarians against barbarians was his best strategy. It was better to use the Visigoths to fight the other barbarians, who numbered between 30,000 to 40,000 warriors, and weaken them all. In this scenario, any outcome would benefit the Roman Empire. From Barcelona, Wallia launched a campaign in 417 against the other barbarian groups in Hispania, starting with the Alans and the Silingi Vandals. These groups controlled the wealthy province of Baetica, as well as Lusitania and Carthaginensis, so regaining these provinces was a priority for the central government. We have very few details about this decisive war, but the Goths caused a true bloodbath among the barbarians in Hispania. The attack must have been highly effective, because the Alans and Silingi Vandals quickly retreated to the Strait of Gibraltar by early 418, after General Constantius had sent some Roman units to strategic locations like Pamplona to protect Tarraconensis and pressure the barbarians from all sides. At the Strait of Gibraltar, Wallia crushed the Silingi Vandals and Alans, practically annihilating them. The king of the Alans died in battle, while the king of the Silingi Vandals was captured and sent to Emperor Honorius. The survivors of the massacre fled north and joined Ganderic, the king of the Hasdingi Vandals. Ganderic then took the title of king of the Vandals and Alans and became the leader of the most powerful army in Hispania. The foundation of the Visigothic Kingdom of Toulouse? Before the Visigoths could decisively defeat the Hasdingi Vandals and Suebi, Honorius recalled them, possibly because he didn't want the Visigoths to become the only relevant barbarian group in the west. After Wallia's campaign, the remaining barbarians were confined to the province of Gallicia, while neither the barbarians nor the Roman administration had any presence in Vasconia and the Cantabrian Mountains. Even though things may have seemed to start going well for the empire, the truth is that tax revenues had dropped significantly due to territorial losses and the devastation caused by the barbarians. Moreover, it was worrisome to see provincial Roman elites collaborating with the barbarians. This time, Honorius did grant the Visigoths land to settle on, though it's likely the central government didn't intend for it to be a permanent arrangement. In any case, Wallia achieved what neither Alaric nor Ataulf had managed: a treaty with Rome and lands for his people to inhabit, cultivate, and draw tribute from as a reward for their military services. The Visigoths settled in Aquitania Secunda and the surrounding areas of Novem Populania and Narbonensis Prima, a large region in the west and south of Gaul that included cities like Poitiers, Bordeaux, and Toulouse. Toulouse became the capital of the nascent Visigothic Kingdom. The Visigoths settled in Aquitaine under the hospitium system, meaning they kept a portion of local taxes to support their troops, with the rest going to the central government. The Visigoths also received a third of the lands of the large landowners in Aquitaine to farm. It was only after a few decades that the Visigoths and Aquitanians could stop sending money to the Roman government in Ravenna. This is important because, while we may view this treaty or moment as the founding of the Visigothic Kingdom of Toulouse, it wasn't seen that way at the time, and can be described as such. From the Roman perspective, settling the Visigoths in southwestern France made sense, as they could help suppress rebellions and attacks in Gaul, Italy, and Hispania. The Visigothic king Wallia could not enjoy the fruits of his victories, as he died shortly after arriving in Toulouse. He was succeeded by King Theodoric I, an illegitimate son or son-in-law of Alaric, who will reign for many years until his death in the historic Battle of the Catalonian Plains against the Huns in 451. The campaigns of Asterius and Castinus. The Vandals needed more land after adding more people to their ranks, and Honorius calmly waited for the inevitable conflict between the Suebi and Vandals. In 419, the Vandals began invading Suebi territory and blockading their neighbors. Since the Suebi were a smaller group and the Roman strategy was to prevent any barbarian group from becoming too powerful in Hispania, the central government decided to support the Suebi. A general named Asterius was sent to Gallia to help the Suebi and capture the usurper Maximus, who was under the protection of the Vandals and needed to be captured and executed like other usurpers. The tactical alliance between the Romans and Suebi led to the Battle of the Nervasus Mountains, somewhere around Galicia or Leon. The Vandals had surrounded the Suebi, who were led by King Hermeric, but the Romans stepped in to prevent a disaster. The Vandals were forced to retreat to Braga, which later became the capital of the Suebi. However, the Vandals' travels didn't end there. Another Roman army intercepted them, and together the Roman forces attacked the Vandals from two sides, easily defeating them and capturing Maximus, who was executed in 422. King Gandaric of the Vandals and Alans decided to move his weakened troops and their families to Baetica, where they began building a fleet to gain naval dominance and plunder cities through piracy. Rather than a defeat, the Vandals gained a lot by moving to such a wealthy province as Baetica. This was a crucial step for the Vandals' future. So, while Asterius' campaign was partly successful, achieving the capture of Maximus and saving the Suebi from destruction, the Vandals managed to use their defeat as an opportunity. By 420, everything seemed to indicate that the Western Roman Empire was recovering. The Barbarians in Hispania were weakened, the Visigoths were serving Rome, and the campaigns in northern Gaul were restoring imperial control. With a few more years of good leadership, the empire might have weathered this crisis, as it had overcome many others before. The key figure behind these successes was General Constantius, who, as compensation for his services, pressured Honorius to name him co-emperor, a request Honorius reluctantly granted. However, Constantius' death 7 months after his coronation brought new challenges. His loss caused internal strife, and Honorius quickly had to appoint a new commander for the Western Roman army. General Flavius Castinus was chosen to fulfill that role, and in 422 he led an expedition to eliminate the Vandals from Hispania and restore central government control. He had support from the allied Visigoths under King Theodoric I and another Roman army led by General Bonifacius, a protege of Galla Placidia. However, the expedition got off to a bad start and ended just as poorly because Bonifacius' army never showed up. Bonifacius fled to the province of Africa in modern-day Tunisia, where he took control of the rich province that supplied much of Italy's grain. Bonifacius would later play a crucial role in Roman civil wars and in the fight against the Vandals when they moved to North Africa. Returning to the 422 campaign, Castinus initially had some success, but then he and the Vandals chose a location for a pitched battle. Castinus didn't need to fight a pitched battle because he already had the upper hand, but he likely had political ambitions and wanted to return to Italy as a victorious general. What the Romans did not expect was that the Visigothic auxiliaries would abandon them before the battle and switch sides to join the Vandals. As a result, Castinus' Roman army was crushed in Baetica, forcing him to retreat to Tarraconensis. This defeat was a severe blow to Roman control in Hispania, while for the Vandals, it secured their dominance in the region and laid the groundwork for their future kingdom in North Africa.
The verdict!
In today's verdict, I want to discuss the Roman strategy of pitting barbarians against each other to prevent coalitions like the alliance of Vandals, Suebi, and Alans that crossed the Rhine and later the Pyrenees. Imagine what could have happened if the Visigoths had teamed up with the Vandals and Alans instead of fighting them, to divide Hispania and southern Gaul among themselves. But the Romans skillfully exploited their differences and needs. They let the barbarians fight over land without allowing any one group to become dominant, as seen in the conflict between the Vandals and Suebi, or they promised food and land to get one group to fight another, as they did it with the Visigoths. This classic divide and conquer strategy was the best option for the Roman Empire, since they lacked the economic and human resources to do more. It could have continued to work if not for the Romans' tendency to get entangled in civil wars and conspiracies. Without this political instability, the Western Roman Empire might have survived in some form. But because its institutions couldn't prevent bloody power struggles and internal conflicts, the empire was sealing its own fate. In earlier centuries, the Roman Empire had faced serious crises that threatened its existence. But through good decisions and some luck, it had survived. This will not be the case for the Roman Empire in the 5th century. And with that, the verdict ends. If you had made it this far, I encourage you to subscribe to New History of Spain on YouTube or on podcast platforms if you haven't already, for more quality content about the history of Spain. This project takes a lot of time, so if you would like to support it, please consider making a donation on Ko-fi or PayPal, or join the Patreon community at patreon.com/newhistoryspain to gain exclusive benefits such as early access, merchandise, and more. In the next episode, I will discuss the rise of the Kingdom of the Suebi under kings Requila and Requiar, until the Visigothic campaign of 456. Thank you for your attention, and see you next time!